Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Playing with Power MTG, where we play with the most powerful cards in the most powerful formats. Tonight's game is brought to you by TCGplayer.com, where you can find all of your cards online while still supporting local game stores. Dragon Shield for all the best accessories to protect your decks, and through Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Our Mox Pearl patron Vial is back for another game. If you want to play with us and be on an episode of Playing with Power, consider signing up to our Mox Pearl tier today. This episode was made possible by all of our supporters over on Patreon. Our Patreon offers tons of benefits, including Discord access and live streaming, behind-the-scenes footage, raw gameplay, additional gameplay series, merchandise discounts, and archive footage of old games as well. We have tiers at all budgets, so sign up today. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Folger piloting the partner pair of Thrasios, Triton Hero, and Vial Smasher the Fierce. This is a control deck known as either 4-color Control or 4-color Rashmi. It seeks to set up card advantage engines while interacting with opponents, and then eventually grind out the game and close out with a combo. His opening hand contains a Bloodstained Mire, Breeding Pool, Mayhem Devil, Limdul's Vault, Oko Thief of Crowns, Dispel, and a Flusterstorm. Next, we have Rio piloting Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. Normally, this deck would look like a stacks deck, but this is actually a mill deck. Rio built this deck around the card Persistent Petitioners and looks to control the board and take advantage of the inevitability in this deck. His opening hand contains a Helm of Obedience, Rally the Ancestors, Dramatic Reversal, Smothering Tithe, Mana Crypt, Island, and a Flooded Strand. After that, we have Mike piloting the partner pair of Thrasios Triton Hero and Bruse Boorish Herder. This is a hybrid deck that combines stacks and evolution to form a lethal combination. His opening hand contains a Taiga, Tarnished Citadel, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Deflecting Swat, Mox Diamond, and an Archon of Emeria. We wish we were joking. Finally, we have Zach piloting the partner pair of Kodama of the East Tree and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. This is a landfall combo deck that looks to loop Sun-Scorched Desert using its commander's abilities to win the game. Its opening hand contains a Jeweled Amulet, Polluted Delta, Copy Artifact, Homeward Path, Jeweled Lotus, Allosaur's Shepherd, and his London Mulligan is an Expedition map. Without further ado, let's begin this lanky, lame, large, lifeless, logical lounge of lucidity. Folger wins the How Long Can You Hold Your Breath While Juggling Deck Boxes challenge and gets to start us off. Folger draws a card for turn and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He casts a Chrome Mox imprinting Mayhem Devil. He passes the turn. Rio draws a card for turn and plays an Island. He casts a Mana Crypt and ends the turn. Mike draws a card for turn and casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Taiga. He casts a Mystic Remora. In response, Folger cracks his Bloodstained Mire, pays a life, and fetches up a Watery Grave onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Limdul's Vault. Folger looks at the top 5 cards of his library, doesn't like what he sees, and continues. He does this a total of 3 times, paying 2 life. He shuffles and then rearranges the selected pile on top. Mystic Remora resolves, and Mike follows it up by playing a Tarnished Citadel. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Soul Ring. He taps Tarnished Citadel to cast Archon of Emeria. The table groans, it resolves, and then Mike ends his turn. Zach draws a card for turn and plays a Polluted Delta, tapped. He passes the turn. Folger draws and plays a Breeding Pool, tapped. He passes. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays a tapped Flooded Strand. Rio ships the turn to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He pays for his Mystic Remora and then draws for turn. He taps Tarnished Citadel to cast his commander, Bruse Boorish Herder. Bruse enters and Mike gives Double Strike and Lifelink to his Archon. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Archon. Folger takes it and Mike gains 4 life. Mike passes the turn. Zach draws and plays a tapped Homeward Path. He ends his turn. Folger draws and plays a tapped Mana Confluence. He weighs his options and decides that he needs to slow down Mike any way he can. He casts an Oko, Thief of Crowns. Mystic Remora triggers and Mike draws. Oko resolves and Folger activates Oko's second ability to Elk Bruse Tarl. Folger passes. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and cracks his Flooded Strand, paying a life and fetching up a Plains onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. Rio passes to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He pays for Mystic Remora and then draws for turn. He moves to combat and attacks Oko with Archon and his Elk. Oko dies and Mike ends the turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield tapped. Zach draws and plays a tapped Bonder's Enclave. He casts a Jeweled Amulet. Remora triggers and Mike draws. Zach passes to Folger. Folger draws and decides to double down on the Stop Mike plan. He holds open mana and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and casts a Null Rod. Remora triggers and Mike draws. In response, with Folger ready to stop Mike from interacting, Mike taps Tarnished Citadel to cast Dovin's Veto, targeting Null Rod. The table groans, and Null Rod is countered. Rio passes. At the end of Rio's turn, Folger taps Mana Confluence to flash in a Hull Breacher. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He lets his Mystic Remora die. He draws and plays a Horizon Canopy. He taps it to cast a Vexing Shusher. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Archon and his Elk. Folger takes it, and Mike ends the turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach activates Jeweled Amulet and puts a charge counter on it. Zach draws and casts a Copy Artifact. It enters as a copy of Sol Ring. Zach ships the turn. Folger draws and casts a Carpet of Flowers. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Hull Breacher. Zach takes a hit, and Folger ends his turn. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and casts a Smothering Tithe. He passes. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike moves to combat and attacks Folger with Archon, Shusher, and the Elk. Folger takes it, and in his second main phase, Mike taps Horizon Canopy to cast his other commander, Thrasios Triton Hero. Mike ends his turn. Zach draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He casts a Mox Opal and passes the turn. Folger draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and then Rio creates a treasure. In his first main phase, Folger adds a black mana from his Carpet of Flowers. He casts a Tainted Pact. It resolves, and Folger exiles until he finds a Mystical Tutor and puts it into his hand. He passes. During his upkeep, Rio finally loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an island. He casts a Lotus Petal and ends his turn. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike moves to combat and attacks Folger with Archon, Shusher, and the Elk. Folger blocks Shusher with Hull Breacher. Shusher and Hull Breacher trade, and Folger takes the rest. Mike passes to Zach. Zach draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He casts a Jeweled Lotus and ends the turn. At the end of Zach's turn, Folger taps Mana Confluence to cast a Mystical Tutor. Folger fetches up a Toxic Deluge onto the top of his library and then moves to his turn. Folger draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. In his first main phase, he adds 2 black through his Carpet. He casts Toxic Deluge, paying 3 life. In response, Mike casts Fierce Guardianship, targeting Toxic Deluge. Rio responds by casting Dovin's Veto, targeting Fierce Guardianship. In response, Mike activates Thrasios. He scries 1 and reveals a Marsh Flats, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. Veto counters Guardianship, and Toxic Deluge resolves, sweeping the board. Folger follows up by tapping Mana Confluence to cast his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. He ships the turn to Rio. During his upkeep, Rio loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He casts a Mystic Remora. He cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up an island onto the battlefield. He recasts his commander, Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. He casts a Persistent Petitioner for 1 mana. What value? He passes to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike cracks his Marsh Flats, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. Remora triggers, and Rio draws. Mike cracks his Jeweled Lotus for 3 green and recasts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. He casts an Eidolon of Rhetoric. Mike passes to Zach. Zach draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Zach removes a counter from Jeweled Amulet and casts his commander, Kodama of the East Tree. He ends his turn. Folger draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Folger makes 3 black mana through Carpet and then casts his other commander, Vial Smasher the Fierce. He passes the turn. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He pays for Mystic Remora and then draws for turn. In his main phase, he casts a Linvala, Keeper of Silence. He ships the turn to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He plays a Tropical Island. He casts a Sylvan Library. Remora triggers and Rio draws. Mike ends the turn. Zach draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts his other commander, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. It enters as a copy of Kodama of the East Tree, and the original Kodama triggers. Zach puts a Lotus Cobra onto the battlefield and triggers Kodama. He puts an Oboro Breeze Caller onto the battlefield and triggers Kodama again. He puts an Allosaurus Shepherd onto the battlefield and triggers Kodama. He puts a Springleaf Drum onto the battlefield, triggering Kodama again. He puts an Exploration onto the battlefield and triggers Kodama. He puts a Mana Crypt onto the battlefield and then lets the last Kodama trigger fizzle. With everyone suddenly realizing the power of his commanders, Zach moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Kodama. Mike takes the hit and Zach passes to Folger. Folger draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Folger makes 3 black mana through Carpet and then casts a Sol Ring, paying for Remora. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 damage to Rio. He ends the turn. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He pays for Remora and draws for turn. He casts another Persistent Petitioner and passes. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. Sylvan Library triggers and Mike draws 2 additional cards. He pays 4 life to keep 1 extra. Smothering Tithe triggers additional 2 times and Mike pays for 1 of them. Rio creates a treasure and then Mike plays a Volcanic Island for turn. He casts an Eternal Witness. It enters and Mike returns a Fierce Guardianship from his graveyard to his hand. He shifts the turn to Zach. At the end of Mike's turn, Zach activates Bonder's Enclave and draws a card and pays for Smothering Tithe. He activates Jeweled Amulet and puts a charge counter on it. The turn then moves to Zach. During his upkeep, Zach loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Castle Garenbrig. Lotus Cobra and 2 Kodama triggers go onto the stack. Zach makes a green mana with Lotus Cobra. With the Kodama triggers still on the stack, Zach taps some of his creatures to help cast Court of Calling where X equals 6. Remora triggers and Rio draws. Zach fetches up a Prime Speaker Zagana onto the battlefield. Zagana and 2 Kodama triggers go onto the stack. In response, Rio flashes in a Hull Breacher. Zach responds by tapping Ancient Tomb to activate Bonder's Enclave, drawing a card, and then paying for Smothering Tithe. With nothing else, Hull Breacher resolves, Zagana gets 6 +1/+1 counters, and Rio creates 7 treasures. Kodama's triggers resolve, and Zach puts a Grim Monolith onto the battlefield. With his plans foiled by Hull Breacher, Zach passes. Folger draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. In his main phase, Folger adds 3 blue mana through his carpet. He casts a Curiosity on Vial Smasher, paying for Remora. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 damage to Rio. Folger ends the turn. At the end of Folger's turn, Rio activates 2 Persistent Petitioners and mills 2 cards. During his upkeep, Rio loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He pays to keep his Remora and draws for turn. He casts a Basalt Monolith and passes to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. He plays a Mana Confluence. Mike recasts his commander, Bruse Tarl, Boris Schurter. Bruse triggers and gives Eternal Witness double strike and lifelink. Mike moves to combat and attacks Folger with Eternal Witness. Folger blocks with Thrasios, Eternal Witness trades, and Mike gains 4 life. Mike shifts the turn. During his upkeep, Zach wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. Zach moves to combat and attacks Folger with Breeze Caller and Rio with Zagana and both Kodamas. Rio blocks Zagana and the original Kodama with 2 Persistent Petitioners. Rio and Folger take the rest, and Zach passes to Folger. Folger draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Folger makes 3 blue mana through his carpet. He plays a Polluted Delta. He recasts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. Vial Smasher triggers, and Rio takes 2. Folger ends his turn. During his upkeep, Rio loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He pays to keep Remora and draws for turn. He casts a Mentor of the Meek. He passes. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws, Smothering Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike moves to combat and attacks Rio with Bruse Tarl. Bruse triggers and gives himself double strike and lifelink. Rio takes it and Mike gains 6 life. In his second main phase, Mike casts Carpet of Flowers, paying for Remora. He passes to Zach. During his upkeep, Zach wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with 2 Kodamas, Zagana, Lotus Cobra, and Breeze Caller. In response, Folger taps Mana Confluence to cast Nature's Claim, targeting his own Chrome Mox. Fish triggers and Rio draws. Vial Smasher triggers, looks down their scope, and snipes Rio for 1 damage. Nature's Claim resolves, Chrome Mox is destroyed, and then Folger gains 4 life. Folger chump blocks Zagana and Kodama with Thrasios and Vial Smasher, and then takes the rest. Zach then passes to Folger. At the end of Zach's turn, Folger cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a Steam Vents onto the battlefield tapped. Folger draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. In his main phase, Folger makes 3 blue mana through his carpet. He casts Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Remora triggers and Rio draws. Folger activates Jace's first ability, targeting himself. Rio creates a treasure and Folger mills 2 cards. Folger ends the turn. At the end of Folger's turn, Rio casts Pull from Tomorrow, where X equals 8. He draws 8 cards and then discards a card. During his upkeep, Rio wins his Mana Crypt flip. He doesn't pay for Remora and sacrifices it. He draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts an Isochron Scepter. Scepter resolves and he imprints Dramatic Reversal. He moves to combat and attacks Folger with Limvala, killing him. Rio passes the turn, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike moves to combat and attacks Rio with Bruse Tarl. Bruse triggers and targets himself. Rio chump blocks with Mentor of the Meek, and Mike gains 3 life. In his second main phase, Mike casts Rest in Peace. In response, Rio casts Rally the Ancestors, where X equals 2. Rio returns 7 persistent petitioners from his graveyard to the battlefield. Rest in Peace resolves and exiles every graveyard. Mike passes. During his upkeep, Zach wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He moves to combat and attacks Rio with Zagana, both Kodamas, and Breeze Caller. Rio chump blocks Zagana and the 2 Kodamas with 3 persistent petitioners. Before damage, Rio activates the persistent petitioners, tapping 4 of them to mill Zach for 12. Rio loses 3 petitioners and takes the rest. Zach passes to Rio. At the end of Zach's turn, Rio activates the petitioners again, tapping 4 advisors to mill Zach for an additional 12. He activates Isochron Scepter and casts a copy of Dramatic Reversal. Rio untaps all of his non-land permanents. He taps 4 more advisors to mill Zach for an additional 12. The turn then moves to Rio. During his upkeep, he taps 4 advisors and mills Zach for 12. Rio exiles his persistent petitioners to the delay trigger of Rally the Ancestors. Rio loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and looks at Mike's Rest in Peace and decides to cast Helm of Obedience. It resolves, and Rio passes the turn. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, Tithe triggers, and Rio creates a treasure. Mike moves to combat and attacks Rio with Bruse Tarl. Bruse triggers and targets himself. Rio chump blocks with Grand Arbiter, and Mike gains 3 life. Mike ends his turn. During his upkeep, Zach's Mana Crypt triggers. In response, Rio activates Helm of Obedience, targeting Zach. Because of the Rest in Peace, Zach mills his entire library into exile. He goes to his draw step, attempts to draw from an empty library, and loses the game. During his upkeep, Rio loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and activates Helm of Obedience, targeting Mike. Mike mills his library into exile. Rio passes. Mike attempts to draw from an empty library and loses the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wild game. Congrats to Rio on his win. He did a great job of taking his time, grinding value, and seizing his chance to win. Special thanks to Mike for his assistance with Rest in Peace. The most valuable card goes to Helm of Obedience. This is a very spicy and flavorful way to win with Rio's deck. 2-card combos are great, and Rio gets extra points for theme. In CEDH, the Azorius color pair does not have many combos to win the game. As such, Rest in Peace and Helm is a staple 2-card combo for any aspiring Azorius mage. This episode was made possible by all of your support. Support from viewers like you is what enables us to bring this to the world. If you want to help out, consider signing up to Patreon, buying some merchandise at our store, or purchasing cards from the TCG player links in the description. All of these help us bring content to you, and you get awesome merchandise, cards at great prices, and cool Patreon perks. If you cannot help financially, liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing these videos goes such a long way as well. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. It is Patreon shoutout time. I'd like to give a shout out to Nathan Smith, Elijah Miller, J-Rock, Pyro, Dark, Philip Hickey, Brad Tobin, Sanguina Lindsay, Snarps the Klept, Matt Wingrove, Delph Driz, Dante, Jared Smith, Baby Jeebus, Rakeko, Greg Babe, Zods, Wayan, Spilrahu, Sparks, CZ, and Nick. Thank you all very much.